All right, South Carolina. Before we put them on the pot to start cooking, I'm going to go back a year. 24, Gamecocks came within a train caboose of making the college football playoff with a 9-3 regular season record, in which they finished off then number 12 Clemson to state their case at the end of the season. Problem is, they're still South Carolina, and they don't carry the clout needed to get them past other big-name programs, so they had to settle for a bowl game against Illinois, which they lost to finish 9-4. Now, if you look at South Carolina under Beamer, in 2023 they went 5-7. In 2022 they were 8-5. 2021 7-6. 2020 2-8. So the problem is they have yet to put together back-to-back seasons where they are a possible playoff team or even an upper-tier SEC team. Can they do that this year? We're going to find out because they're ranked in the top 20 to begin the season. Well, Beamer begins his 5th season in Columbia, and the biggest question entering the season is, can they win at the SEC level with consistency? You cannot be a top 25 program every other year and expect to earn everyone's respect nationally. Up to this point, the Gamecocks have been unable to put that together. 2025, they have a chance with a potential Heisman Trophy contending quarterback in Lenore Sellers. 6'3", 240 pounds of pure football talent and excitement. I won't like if you have a Sellers at quarterback, you tend to make anybody in their fan base play a Space Odyssey or Sandstorm. But let's be realistic though. Al 900 isn't going to create the rest of the roster for the Gamecocks. So beamer me up, Scotty. Question for 2025: are we buyers or are we sellers? Sellers is the answer. Well, buying on Sellers is the answer. Freshman All-American, National Freshman of the Year, SEC Freshman of the Year, and so on and so on. You get the trend. Sellers completed 65% of his passes for 2,534 yards with 18 TDs and 7 interceptions as a freshman. He carried the ball another 166 times for 674 yards and 7 TDs. I want to compare him to somebody we all know very well. Not in physical stature, but in production, and that's Jaden Daniels. In 2023, Daniels carried the ball 135 times for 1,100 yards. Okay, in his career, between Arizona State and LSU, AD carried the ball 617 times. That's a load, especially for a guy of his stature who doesn't weigh 200 pounds. Well, the pro side for Sellers is using his legs is that he's a bigger guy. He's a tough guy. He's a huge. I mean, if you put him at any other position, you swear he was a tight end. The pro side. Now, the con side using his legs is he doesn't avoid hits like Jaden Daniels did. That's the key. And it cost them a couple of games last year when he was visibly shaken up because of that. So here's the rub for Sellers in the offense. Who's going to step up to be his target? You know, Xavier Leggett was a guy that produced for them a couple of years ago, but they really last year didn't have a guy that he can depend on. He had to spread the ball around to about 7 or 8 different receivers. Heading into the season, it seems to be the odds-on favorite to be that guy is Nick Harbor. But again, Nick Harbor's not a guy who has the production in the past. He's 6'5", 235 pounds, yes, and he can run a 4.3 40. Monster, physical monster. Mazio Bennett, another guy coming back. Between the two of them, they've only caught 56 passes last year combined for maybe 700 yards. Not exactly a wide receiver room that's going to keep defense coordinators up at night. Harbor has long been a guy with talent, is incredible. You may say he's the guy you want him stepping off the bus first, right? Okay, can he be wide receiver 1? Well, give the guy credit because in the offseason, he stopped running track and focused on football. Will that translate to the football field and the production? We don't know. Well, that's yet to be determined. But you got to like the fact that he's willing to give up track and field when he was probably, a low 10 second 100-meter guy? That's giving up a lot, but, they're going to need him to be that guy because I don't believe Bennett or anybody else on that offense will be the wide receiver 1. Let's talk about the trenches because that's where I think is going to make or break South Carolina's season on both sides of the football. The one thing the Gamecocks have working in their favor is experience on the offensive line. They have 4 guys penciled in who played a lot of football games in college football, not necessarily for South Carolina. You got 2 guys coming back for Carolina. The most impressive stat you can throw out in 2024, other than the defense and the way they turned the ball over, is the way the offensive line protected Sellers in the second half of the season. You know, Carolina went on a 6-game winning streak a year ago, and they gave up only 7 sacks in those 6 games. Now, in stark contrast to that, in the first half of the season, they gave up 32 sacks. That's just differences night and day. The offensive line finally came about. So, can they do that again? Can they be what South Carolina needs to get past the hump in the first half of the season? We'll see. They're going to need to, because the other part of the trenches is the defensive line, and they've got one guy coming back in their front 7. One guy, Dylan Stewart. Now, it's a pretty good guy. You know, he was a freshman All-American. The guy had seven or eight sacks last year as a freshman All-American, but he did that because they had other guys, NFL guys, playing alongside him that freed him to do what he does, and he took advantage of that. Now, going back to the offensive line, who's going to run the ball? If they brought in from Utah State transfer Razul Faison, who is not eligible yet. So when your running back 1 is not eligible and don't know if the NCAA is going to make him eligible by the time the season starts, is Oscar Adewey going to be that guy? Don't know. I mean, 2 years ago, he did rush for 738 yards on 123 carries. So he could fill in. He's just not that guy that you can depend on like they did last year with Rocket Sanders. Going back to the defense. Now, Stewart did have, and I have it here, he's 6.5 sacks, 10.5 tackles for loss. But gone are Nick Ebenworry, Demetrius Knight, Bam Martin Scott, Debo Williams, TJ Sanders, O'Donnell Fortune, Kyle Kennard, Tonka Hemingway, and Alex Huntley. All gone. What are you going to do on defense? Well, Stewart's going to have to be the man now. Can he be the man? Can he perform in the spotlight with all those other guys taking up blocks and letting him create pressure? Well, you got guys like Brian Thomas Jr., Nick Barrett, Monkel Goodwine, all guys that are in the program. Can they step up and at least take the pressure off of Stewart where he's not double teamed every play? I don't know. I'm not comfortable with where they stand on the front 7. Now, granted, they're great on the back end because they return most of the guys in the secondary. Also added a couple of transfers like Sean Murphy and Brandon Cease. Now, if you're expecting the USC defense to show up from 2024, you're going to be waiting a long time. In the first half of the season, they got not a really difficult schedule, but they're going to play Virginia Tech to lead off the season. Virginia Tech's never a pushover, and that's going to be an emotional game, especially for the Beamer family. Dad coached there for, 3 decades. He built that program, so it's going to be emotional. And with limited experience, man, they're going to have to rely on Sellers to make some big plays in that first half of the season. And in that first half of the season, they play LSU in Baton Rouge. Now, a lot was made about the LSU game last year and the officiating, and some things didn't go South Carolina's way. I mean, you gotta flush that down the toilet and go move on. You got to move on to the next game, because if South Carolina is still thinking about that, LSU's going to blow them off the field. Now, we're going to look at can Sellers elevate the team by himself? And I'm not saying by himself as in he's the only guy they got. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, can he elevate his play like a Heisman Trophy contender can, that's good enough for 2 or 3 wins just on big plays that he can make? And I don't know if he can, because you got guys like Nussmeier and Arch Manning, and he's not going to go up against Arch in the regular season, but he's going to face Nussmeier. He's going to face Mateer. He's going to face Diego Pavia. Those are big matchups. So the question for the panel is, who has more pressure on their shoulders, Beamer or Lenore Sellers? That's what I'm posing to you guys.
Yeah, I think Lenore Sellers has more pressure on his shoulders this year. With them not having the key skill positions, he at times last year tried to do too much with more depth on the offensive side. So I think maybe not from the outside looking in, maybe Beamer at the end of the day being the head coach is more pressure, but I think Sellers is going to put an immense amount of pressure on himself to, make sure that this team can still win 8-9 games. So I think from an internal standpoint, he puts more pressure on himself than what's truly needed. And I think you see that a lot of times with a really good quarterback who may not have the team around him, that, it could lead to a lot of mistakes by him trying to do too much. I think one thing for Sellers, the key for him to stay healthy and stay productive all season is don't try and run over linebackers and safeties. Just get your 10, 12 yards and get out of bounds this year.
So I agree the pressure's on Sellers more so than the coach, Beamer, simply because they had a great year last year. So pressure's off Beamer. You look at the team they had last year, there were times Sellers had to do a lot. Texas A&M, he took over that game in the second half, and I think there was a stat I read, he broke 27 tackles in the second half alone in that game. We know in the LSU game, him getting hurt probably cost them that game last year. So they depend on him a lot. I do think we see Bennett step up and be a good wide receiver for him. And again, Harbor's committed to the game, so we'll see there. So I think they're a little better at wide receiver. And I'll be honest, I questioned a little bit on their defense. But reading a little bit about fall, kind of looking at the roster a little bit, I still think they have a lot of promise to be very talented on defense. Brian Thomas Jr., I think, he had 4.5 sacks last year in a very limited role. So I think you could easily add 2.5 to him. Stewart steps up, gets them to 7, 8 sacks. And then their linebackers are 4 deep. Now, it's through the portal they've got there. Fred Johnson played for him, and they're very high on him. And then you have Sean Murphy and Justin Okronako, from a transfer from Alabama. I'll never pronounce it right, but he's a very talented player. In fact, I think he ends up starting by the end of the year. Jerron Willis. So I think, and Brian, you mentioned the defensive line with Nick Barrett, Monkel Goodwin, who's a transfer from Bama. And then they also have Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, transfer from Georgia, who played quite a bit. So I think that as long as they don't, again, depth is a factor on that defensive line. As long as they don't have injuries on their defensive line, I think they can be good defensively. You reference the secondary, they bring a lot back there, and then a transfer in the secondary, too, with Brandon Cisse. So I think their secondary could be as good as any in the league, just about. So I think the defense has the potential to be good, and they have maybe one of my most favorite defensive coordinators in Clayton White. I love the way he coaches defense. I love to watch his teams play defense. They're very fast to the ball. They play the run very well, and they put pressure on the quarterback. So I think they'll be solid defensively. It's just, can they get to 10-2? Or are they 9-3, 8-4? I mean, I think they're kind of one of those teams in that range. So, it's just going to be interesting to watch them. And they can't have Sellers get hurt. Both of you have referenced that. And he's going to, I just don't know, Daniel, if he can avoid those hits. I don't know if his style of play will allow him to say, hey, I'm going to take my 10 yards. I'm going to get down. He seems to like contact.
Yeah, no. That's the contrast with a player like a Jaden Daniels.
Yes.
We watched JD avoid hits the entire season, his Heisman season, and that was the key to him staying in the lineup. But can Sellers do that? He's just not that type of player. You talk about the way defense is coached. I just want to read off a couple of superlatives about that defense last year and the way they played the game. Opponents averaged 316 yards and only 18 points a game, and that's playing in the SEC. They registered 41 sacks, and they forced 24 turnovers that led directly to 38 points. The good news is, as we said, secondary returns 3 starters, and they're guys that are ball hawks. So the big question is, will they be able to force turnovers like they did last year? Because that was such a key for them to turn games around. That led probably to two or three wins last year, was the way the defense turned the ball over. Well, just don't know if they can do that. And that's my big question mark. With that segue, let's go into the schedule. Broken down the schedule in 2. The first half of the season, the second half of the season. At home against Virginia Tech, I'm going to say that, that's going to be probably a 10 to 14 point win. I think it's going to be emotional. It's going to be in the first half, but I think once they settle in, they're just going to run away with the game. South Carolina State win. Third game of the year, they face Vandy at home. Okay, Pavia might be able to keep the game close in the first half, but I think South Carolina is just too much, and they'll overwhelm them. This is the game that I have marked down as a loss. Game number 4 at Missouri. I think Missouri is going to give them hell, and I think Missouri is going to come away with the win in week 4. Week 5, they have Kentucky at home. I think Kentucky's going to be a doormat, so I have this marked down as a win. That means South Carolina's 4-1 heading into Baton Rouge. And then this happens. I think they have a loss at LSU. I think they have a win at home the next week against Oklahoma, and then it kind of falls off for them. They have Alabama at home, which I have as a loss, at Ole Miss, which I have as a loss, at Texas A&M, which I have as a loss. Coastal Carolina gives them a little break at home, that's a win, and then they play Clemson at home to wrap up the regular season, which I give them a loss. Now, maybe I'm just pessimistic about the Gamecocks, but I have them finishing 6-6, and then once again, that trend of up one year, down the next continues for Beamer. So, in summation, no cock of the walk in 2025. What do you guys think about schedule-wise?
I like the way you opened it with the caboose, since that's right by their stadium, and then you close it with the cock of the walk. That's interesting, good stuff. They definitely have some tough stretches in their schedule, and road games at LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. Those are going to be challenging games. Again, I'm not as high on Ole Miss as some, so I think that's a game that they can get. And then I just think that Clemson game at the end of the year means so much to South Carolina. They lost to Dabo for several years in a row. They were able to win last year at Clemson. And I just think that game will be one that they're very up for. They could, look, to me, their range is very wide on their schedule. And beating a team like Bama at home, I mentioned those 3 tough road games. Beating a team like Bama at home is not easy either. So, you're looking at potentially 4 losses and then anything else you add on top of that. I do think they get Oklahoma at home, and I do think they beat Ole Miss on the road. I think they're positioned, if you just look at it, to probably be an 8-4 team. But if you could upset a team like Bama and go 9-3 and then, take the potential from there. I know I've said it on a couple other these reviews. I think at least 2 9-3 teams make the playoffs this year. Because when I look at a lot of teams, I see a lot of teams that I think that's 9-3, that's 9-3. And I do think if South Carolina ends 9-3 this year, I think the potential for them to be in the playoffs is there. I don't think you see a 10-1, 11-1 team that's like SMU last year, or even Indiana, that you really don't have any top 20 makes it this year over 9-3 teams. So I think if you have a 9-3 team that's got a couple of top 20 wins, they potentially could be in there. But again, if you get Sellers hurt for a game or two, 6-6 is definitely going to be something that could happen. He's got to stay healthy, and that's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I agree. The schedule's tough. I mean, they're going to play 7 ranked teams, 6 out of the SEC, 1 from the ACC. So 6-6, I think, wills fall off a little bit. I think they're more of an 8-4 team who could sneak out a 9th win. And like you said, if they're a 9-3 team, that means they beat 4, maybe 5 ranked teams this season. I would think a 9-3 Carolina team with their schedule gets into the college football playoff. But 6-6 is definitely within the realm. I mean, 6-6 or 9-3 is, how healthy is Sellers? Do they get a few key plays in big games to make those wins?
All right.
Good stuff. I think that's a good one. Again, I think the more that we've done these, that we've been pretty good with it.
I need to take some lessons from Brian on intros and exits.
Well, that's the journalist in me, man.
That's what I was going to say. No, that's that writer.
Yeah, that's being a writer for 30 years.
We can learn and kind of think of some of that little stuff as we're going into things.
I just like journalism guys call that the lead, and you want your lead to pack a punch. You want your lead to knock the reader off. Same thing with doing broadcasts. You want your lead to be powerful, and that's why I brought the caboose in there and then finished off with the cock of the walk. Because that's 2 important things to what South Carolina does on game day.
Absolutely, and anybody that knows a little bit about South Carolina can respect and have fun.
I got to tell you guys a story, and I probably should have told this story on the podcast. Senior year of college, I traveled with the football team the entire year and did stats for the radio crew. We play at South Carolina. One of many games we played that year in the SEC. We played at Ole Miss, at Alabama, and at South Carolina that year. So we go to South Carolina, and it's open-air press box. The open-air press box where the radio crew is right above the fans, the South Carolina fans. I mean, you literally, if you stood up and reached down, you could pat somebody on the head. Next to us was the coaching staff, Tech's coaching staff. And back then, you had guys like Pat Tilley was on the coaching staff. Pat was sitting right across the glass from me. I'll never forget this. Tech and South Carolina met in the middle of the field before the game started, and a fight broke out between the two teams. And man, the fans got unruly quick and turned around and wanted to fight the coaches. Well, they had to hold Pat Tilley back. Pat Tilley was about to climb in the bleachers and fight somebody. And this guy, like two or three of them right in my face wanted to fight me. I'm like, oh man, I'm just a student. You don't want to fight me. I was outnumbered, man. Yeah, they 2,000 drunk South Carolina fans. I wasn't about to get involved in that. But also, they filmed a part of the movie The Program at halftime and used the backdrop of the crowd as part of. So there was a part in the movie of The Program where I recognized the actual crowd from that South Carolina Tech game. But anyway, long story short, Chris Bonio kicks a 45-yard field goal in the fourth quarter, and we beat them 13-10.
Chris Bonio is a great Steeler kicker.
Yep, Tech had a great team that year. We actually beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa too. So we beat South Carolina on the road, beat Alabama on the road, lost in overtime in Waco to Baylor to open the season, and then lost to Ole Miss in Oxford. We also traveled to West Virginia to end the year and traveled to Fresno State. So, man, I was all over the place that year. Tech was an independent that year, so we played that kind of schedule all over the place.
Who coached that year?
Joe Raymond Peace. I don't know if you guys remember Joe Raymond.
Don't.
Yeah, he actually was the coach when we made the move from 1AA to Division One, and they actually had a winning record. We went to the Independence Bowl the year before and played Maryland, and actually tied Maryland at the Independence Bowl. They had a really good team. A lot of NFL guys, including Willie Roaf at left tackle. And I want to tell you, Willie Roaf against Alabama played against Alabama's two defensive ends that played in the NFL. I think one of them was John Henderson. You remember him? Yep. Henderson, and I can't remember what the other guy. Both were All-Americans. And Willie Roaf held them to 0 sacks the entire game against Alabama.
I can believe that. Roaf was excellent. Great Saint for years. Henderson was 92, big defensive end.
Oh, yeah. So that was great, and that was that year. That was 1992. And that's the year they won the national championship, I believe.
It sure might have been.
But anyway, that's my story from college. And West Virginia, coldest game I ever been to in my life. It was the 12th game of the year in late November, and it was minus 10 degrees in Morgantown, West Virginia for that game. I didn't care if we won or lost. I just wanted to get the hell out of there, get back on the plane and go home, man.
Just get this over with.
Like, dude, I'm from Louisiana. We don't do this.
Was that, it was probably after when they had that quarterback. I think he was in the 80s that played for the Giants. Was it Hostetler?
Oh, Hostetler. Yeah, that was after Hostetler. Yeah, I don't remember who played for. It was after Hostetler and before White, Pat White, and those guys. So it was. They weren't great. I mean, it was just a mediocre West Virginia team then. But yeah, it was fun going over there. But God, it was cold.
Yeah, it's too cold. I'm not watching the game in minus temperatures.
Yeah, no, I'm not going for that.
There's only one game that I would desire to watch in that cold atmosphere, and this is a bucket list game I want to go watch, and that's Army and Navy.
Yeah, I can see that in Philly.
I'll suck it up.
Yeah.
For that game experience to watch Army and Navy, but that's it. Everything else, if it's that cold, I'm staying inside.
The most fun I had that year was actually the Ole Miss game. I enjoyed going to because that was my first experience going to Ole Miss for one of their home games. Mm-hmm. It was great, man. I loved it.
I think everybody ought to go there. To me, it's a fun place to watch. The atmosphere is not intimidating in the game.
No.
It's not intimidating. But the pregame experience is a lot of fun.
Yeah, Tech had a couple of other NFL players that year. They had a linebacker named Myron Baker who ended up playing for the Bears. And then they had a guy named Artie Smith who was a defensive end who played for the 49ers. Neither played an extensive NFL career, but both, had 4 or 5 seasons in the NFL. So, and we also had a guy at defensive end named Eric Shaw. Eric Shaw was an All-American at Florida State who got booted off of their team for all kind of violations, and he ended up at Tech. Played at Tech 1 year and had like 15 sacks. He had a cup of coffee with Cincinnati Bengals in the NFL, but that was it. He really didn't do much in the NFL. He was just a problem child.
Well, good stuff today. If we can get Sweets on here this week to do Georgia and Tennessee, and then